Liftoff, to me, is the story of a woman of grit. A woman who grew up in the 60s of India and went on to mother Conserve and nurture this company, which made a foray with energy-efficient meters to live on long after it has been taken over by Schneider. Conserve, an emotion, a lasting ideology that Ashish Sen has recreated with Hema Hattangady, Liftoff's protagonist and co-author at once. In doing so, there came a day when, walking along a Goan beach, Ashish kept returning starfish to the mighty waves of the Arabian Sea, leaving his wife and son wondering why he was doing so. Why, Ashish?
Why, Nimi? Thank you for starting off on that note. The answer to your question actually, it can be answered in just two words. Why? Because of Hema Hattangady, who is the lady right here. It was Hema's belief in making a difference and community well-being which prompted me to do what I did when I was vacationing in a beach in South Goa, Talpona Beach it was, in the winter of 2016 with my wife and son. I had just heard the starfish story from Hema Hattangady as I was researching into this emotion that you called that was Conserve. And I discovered that Conserve is not just the story of how a small family-run business confronted by financial risk transformed itself and became India's most successful and largest energy management company. It was much, much more. It was how a very, very distinct culture of well-being was created. A culture of well-being which has stayed with every Conservian, as the book reveals. And in the process of researching this book, Hema shared with me the starfish story, which became her training metaphor. And it is really all about making a difference. The starfish story is the vision of a visionary by the name of Joel Arthur, and I'd like to share it with you. I'll read it now, Nimi, if I may. A man was walking along the beach at sunset. He listened to the swish, swish of the waves and the padding of his own feet. And then he noticed that the sand was littered with starfish. All along the beach, thousands and thousands had been washed up by the sea. There they lay dying because they could not survive long out of the water. In the distance, the man saw a boy running frantically up and down the beach. As the man got closer, he saw that the boy was picking up starfish and throwing them back into the sea. Again and again he ran. He picked up one or two of the stranded creatures and returned them to the water. The boy did not notice the man approaching until he shouted, "Little boy, what are you doing?" The boy replied, "Can't you see? I'm saving the starfish." "Don't be silly," said the man. "There are thousands and thousands of starfish. How can you possibly make a difference?" The boy hesitated for a minute, and then he reached down, carefully picked up another starfish, and cast it back into the sea. Looking back at the man, he said, "Well, it made a huge difference to that one." In December 2016, the starfish story uncannily came to life for me. It was weird. As my wife and son and myself were walking down Talpona Beach, I saw the beach dotted with lines and lines of starfish. And almost involuntarily, almost instinctively, I picked up picked them up and threw them back into the sea. And this was not surprising because Hema's starfish story had clearly struck home. So that's my answer to your question.
Hema, could you talk about it?
Yeah, so my takeaway from this movie called The Power of Vision and the Starfish story was this. I learned that it was the job of me, my duty as an employer, to make sure that every employee in my organization connected with the vision of the company. And I also realized that the wrongest way of going about a vision statement and articulating that to the company was to have senior leaders strutting around and saying, we are a big company, we are a wonderful company, we have a great vision, and you've all got to love it. That's not how it works, I realized the hard way. When I saw this movie, I realized that my job was to figure out a simple way of making people decide what role they want to play in achieving the vision of the company. So you know what I did? We used to run a vision review workshop because I learned, again the hard way, that visions are never cast in stone for any organization. Every once in 2 or 3 years, we would revisit in a workshop, show this movie, talk about the starfish, show the vision of the company, and then I handed out a form with 3 simple questions. The first was this: how do you think you can contribute to the vision of the company? The second was, what do you think will come in your way? Sometimes they wrote the CEO, but it was good to know that. And the third question was, how do you think we can help you remove those obstacles? I think reading those answers helped us to understand exactly what was going on in the hearts and minds of our employees. We actually got a line of sight into their aspirations which never come out. Believe me, when you have those routine appraisal interviews, this kind of aspirational thought doesn't come out because it's a very structured format that is usually used. So what did we do with these answers? We put them into appraisal forms, and in their discussions twice or thrice a year, we'd say, hey, remember you said you'd like to do this? This is how you'd like to contribute. How can we help you do that? So I'm just going to end this piece with a little example of what this process really achieved for us. We had a service engineer, a very humble guy from a local engineering college, and he used to repair our meters at the service centers at the headquarters. And in his, how am I doing for time? Okay. And in his review form, he wrote, I want to contribute to the vision of Conserve becoming India's largest energy management company. So we said, how do you want to do that? He said, I want to stop repairing meters and I want to get into the software division of the company. So we were a little astonished, and then we found this young boy had already equipped himself. He had taken on his own dime, on his own time. He had qualified himself as a software professional while he was repairing meters. He had a passion, and he was raring to join the team. What more can you ask for? So we quickly moved him into the team, found a replacement for him. And today, after Conserve was acquired by Schneider, this young man has become the leader of a European energy management software team in Schneider. So that's the power of the starfish story for Conserve. Thank you. Thank you.
That's amazing, Hema. That's the nurturing spirit in her. But beneath that soft and nurturing spirit is a woman of grit. In fact, Hema not only went on to pursue an MBA at IIM Calcutta after her wedding, but also enter the male-dominated engineering sector, joining Conserve, the company her father-in-law had set up. Of course, as a non-engineer taking on an administrative role in a male-dominated industry, Hema found herself standing up to her family. So Hema, talk about all those challenges you faced as a woman in a man's world.
Well, I guess every woman in a man's world faces these challenges, so it was not unusual. But let me tell you a few that really, really became quite painful and required every ounce of courage and persistence that I had. I think the first problem was, or the first pain point, was just not being taken seriously. I don't know how the men here feel, if you have ever had situations where you felt you were not being taken seriously just because of your gender, but I can tell you, whether it was a customer visit or a visit to a public sector office where I had to meet a senior government official, I always found myself having to prove myself again and again, and starting off at a point of extremely low credibility. Not a nice feeling. I must tell you the story about how, as you know, in the early days, I had to learn how to sell the product. And I landed up, it was almost dusk, in the deep south, in Madurai, actually at Dindigal, carrying a 12-kilo portable energy analyzer on my shoulder. And I had been invited to make a demonstration to this mill owner. And when I walked into the textile mill, what do I see? I thought, you know, there'll be a kind of a boardroom and I can make a presentation. And this man is sitting there, you know, caste marks and all. And he's lined up all the lackeys in his company, all of them wearing very pristine white mundus and white shirts with their caste mark, all standing there. You know what their role turned out to be? That they had to laugh at everything he said and laugh at me. So I set this product down and I start the demonstration. And he says, "Madam, first tell me what is the cost of this product?" I said, "Sir," he said, "What is the price?" I said, "It's 70,000 rupees. So he looks at his lackeys and he says, "Did you listen to her? 70,000. You do one thing, you please give her one screwdriver and one spanner." So I'm given these instruments and I'm asked to open the top lid of the product. Fortunately, I knew how to do that. And he asked me, pointing to every component on the PCBs, "What is the cost of this? What is the cost of this?" And he went on, and he's totting it up in his head. And at the end of it, he slaps his thigh with delight and says, "Did you see that? It's 30,000 rupees. And what did she say I should pay her? 70,000 rupees. So there was this roar of laughter at me, you know. What is this little chit of a girl doing here in front of our talaivar, you know? So I was already beginning to tremble. And at that point, he said, "I don't think people like you should be coming to sell the product." I said, "But sir, give me a chance to explain. What you saw was the hardware. What you have to realize is that there is embedded software in this chip, which is called firmware." He said, "Please, I've understood what your product is all about. I think you should leave." And I did leave in a flood of tears. Years later, he became a friend. He realized what our products could do. But I can tell you, that kind of experience was not something that I would want to ever live through again. So that's about the women challenges. And maybe we can get on to the next question. We probably run out of
Ashish,
time.
did you observe any, did the men say anything about her briefly?
You know, I think Hema has a remarkable way of transforming an adversity into a strength. And I believe she demonstrated that amply in her leadership. And this is because Hema is a person who really has the courage of her conviction. I'm going to take off a little on this and just remind our friends, many of you probably know far more than me about the manufacturing sector in India. Nitin Pai, the co-founder of the Takshashila Institution, actually has described this very aptly. He says it's the most patriarchal and misogynistic sector. It was in this sector that Hema cut her teeth. She started her career as a saleswoman selling digital meters on SGP Road, which has been described as the Dust Bowl of Bangalore. And she would often be greeted with total derision from men there who would say, "What are you doing here? Where are all the men in your organization?" And I recall a comment, and I'm going to end with this, which was made by K.S. Jain, one of the traders whose office is in SGP Road, who told Hema many years later that, "You know, ma'am, you were presented with a ball of fire when you were handed over the leadership, the mantle of leadership in Conserve. And you clearly had just two choices. You could either drop that ball because it was a burning ball and run, or you could run with it so fast that the flame would burn out." And Hema chose to do the latter. And in that process, she demonstrated, she led from the front and demonstrated the strength of her leadership. Having said this, I need to also add that two of her strongest supporters were her husband and the chairman of the board, Mr. T. Thomas, both men. And I think Hema will acknowledge that she is largely indebted to them.
Very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ashish.
Right. So actually, you know, while Hema and Ashish write a lot about all that went right and wrong, while reading the book, I see a lot that went right, especially her role in creating a no bribe policy, boldly sacking marketing personnel, all men, mind you, slowly creating nurturing inroads for a bribe free environment. Can you imagine that? A bribe free environment. So, Hema.
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about that journey. Not easy, but I'm so glad we stuck with it. The first thing is we found it quite easy to do it because at the top there was perfect alignment between the investors. That was my husband Ashok, my chairman T. Thomas, and I, and members of the board. Remember this, that if at the top people pull in different directions on this very critical policy of how you want to do business, there's going to be no starting point. So that was really in our favor. But let me tell you two quick stories which will kind of describe exactly how we managed to create a corruption-free culture. The first is we were coming up against an assistant commissioner of sales tax who refused to assess our file for 10 years. For 10 years, she had packed up our files there and she refused to do anything about it until she was given a bribe. And how did she demand the bribe? She didn't want to say anything. She was scared she'd be recorded. So she would hold up a calculator in which she had punched her demand, and she would just do that. So my colleague came back and said, hey, I can't take any more of this. Why don't you help me out? You keep saying don't bribe. What do I do? If we don't pay her that bribe and our file doesn't get assessed, then we are going to have to pay a serious fine and penalty. I said, who's a super boss? We found the commissioner, went to him, remarkable guy. At the moment I walk in, he says, listen, I've heard many complaints about this lady. Are you willing to give that complaint in writing? I said, how many reams of paper do you want me to fill up? He laughed and he gave me a sheet. He said, sit down here and do it now. I filled it up, gave it to him. He calls up his boss in Delhi and says, sir, we finally got our written complaint. Now we can transfer the lady out. So it just showed that everybody knew what she was all about, but she was absolutely untouchable. Within minutes, our file got transferred and we got a very clean person to deal with. Do I have time for another quick story, or do you want to go on to the next? I have to tell you this story. So when I was traveling in the West, one of my area managers said, ma'am, if you don't mind my saying so, I think you're being a little innocent. I said, what happened? He says, you keep talking about 3-year business plans and quadrupling our profits and all of that. But did you know that all your regional managers are taking kickbacks from distributors in exchange for routing sales through them? I said, rubbish. But then I made inquiries, found out that he was right. I was totally aghast, and I felt very dumb that I didn't know what was going on under my nose, and here I was going rah-rah about the next 5 years. Called up my chairman. I said, what do I do? He says, Hema, fire them all. I said, are you kidding me? He says, just fire them all. I said, do you realize what will happen if I do that? What's going to happen to my business plan? He said, do you realize what will happen if you don't do it? And I think those were the wisest words I've heard because I realized the wisdom. I just went to all the 3 cities, terminated their contracts, got in new people. The single biggest message that went out to our distributors and to our salespeople was this, that the company will stop at nothing to create a clean culture, even if it meant that we would have a temporary dip in sales. So that was our story about it.
In fact, what's really interesting or striking about this narrative is that Hema chose to learn from everybody, including the children, and taking their feedback, and then she built an environment of trust and loyalty long after the company had been sold to Schneider, right? So,
yeah,
tell us how you went about that.
Sure. You know what? We discovered that the best thing to be is a learning organization. And my HR mentor told me that in one of India's largest IT companies based in Bangalore, they sometimes invite children to the board meeting so they could get irreverent and fresh advice. I said, what a lovely idea. So I invited the kids of some of our employees, aged between 10 and 16, and I asked them to sit at a monthly management review. My colleagues were aghast, but we got fabulous advice. You know what we asked them to do? We asked them to rate us on our code of conduct. We said, here is what we say we believe in. Can you give us a scorecard and tell us how we're doing? We didn't do too well. And I think it taught us a lot of lessons. They would also go out to the other departments and solve naughty problems for them. So that was a lovely, refreshing experience. And I think the moral of the story is you can learn from anywhere and anybody.
Fantastic.
I have just one more story to add to this, which is extraordinary. I think the impact on the Conservians was really, really insightful for me. I mean, 9 years after Conserve had been acquired by Schneider, I was traveling to Mumbai, to meet a whole of erstwhile Conservians to discover what their experiences about Conserve was like. This was Mumbai at the height of the monsoons. The city was flooded, my flight was late, I thought no one would be there. Imagine my surprise when I land up at the venue and I'm expecting to see a handful of people and I see this packed room of people who had braved the rains, many of whom did not reside in Mumbai but had traveled all the way from Pune, from Nashik, from nearby towns, all there to share their experiences. But what was truly extraordinary about this visit was that when they started sharing their experiences about Conserve, they were all talking about Conserve as if Conserve was very much there, although Conserve had long since ceased to exist. And this was when I discovered what you mean a living culture really is all about. Hema had really truly created, her leadership rather, had truly created a living, sustainable culture which continues to live on long after the organization has ceased.
That's lovely. That's why I guess there's the book and also an interesting film that has been inspired by Liftoff.
Yeah, so, sorry, Ashish. No, absolutely, please. I discovered after the book was published by Karthik Venkatesh at Westland, who's right here in the audience, that people don't read as much as they used to. And they consume content in a very different way. And when my book came out in Kannada on the MyLang digital platform, I realized that the audiobook was much more popular than the print version. So I said, why don't we make a short documentary film, put it out on YouTube, public domain, and allow people who are seeking inspiration to watch the film if they find it. And I've decided I'm not going to spend on the promotion. There are enough keywords embedded in there. And if people look for energy conservation, inspiration, leadership, they're bound to come across the film. Please have a look at it. It's called Liftoff, Nest to Sky. And if you love it, tell the world. If you don't, write to me. I just wanted to end, I think we're out of time now, just to say that our company was called as having, set to have a very fiercely demanding and deeply caring culture. And today, 12 years after we've sold the business, what I realize is that Conservians the world over, whether they're still in Schneider, outside Schneider, or running their own businesses, try and practice this wonderful combination of values. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for being here.
Ashish, do you...
Just very quickly, I echo Hema, you must see this film. It's a very insightful film. You'll have lots of anecdotes and experiences of Conservians saying why they are so proud to be a Conservian. They'll share experiences how Conserve was a zero-tolerance company when it came to corruption and much more. But above all, this film will tell you why the Conserve story is really all about leadership. It's all about instilling collective leadership. You'll hear this echoed in the film from many Conservians who felt that they owned the business. It was this synergy of aligning human capital with business strategy that really, in many ways, was the USP of this remarkable phenomenon called Conserve. Thank you.